Okay. Hi, everyone. Today I'm here with Lyndon Purcell from JPS. Hi, Lyndon. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Marco. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a little hot. Hopefully, it doesn't get worse than that while we speak. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Lyndon has a bachelor degree in exercise science, and he also has a master in high performance sports science. He has several PT certifications and has been working as a content producer and as a coach for JPS, which is it's a pretty big company in the especially in the evidence-based community. If you don't know JPS, you should. So I'll not go into that anymore. Did I miss anything? Is
No,
anything
that
more?
no, that's great. That's already overselling me.
And okay, actually, I'm gonna oversell you a little bit more because you also have a fantastic website on the side, which is thereforthink.org. Every link will be in the description, so if I get anything wrong, I'll make sure I don't in the caption. Which is, I don't know, what would you like to start by telling us what the website is about and why did you decide to start it?
Yeah, so I think that's always a really tough question to ask and people answer. The reasoning, or I'll start with what the website's about. I guess the website probably in general can just be described as a place where I'm putting my thoughts. So I guess to the degree that which I can categorize my thoughts, I can sort of define the content of the website like that. But I guess, as you're well aware, like our brain sort of tends to go in very random directions, and there's some sort of fairly indirect links in the things that we think about. But probably like a general description of the things that I'm trying to put on there is things regarding decision making, how we can sort of better understand the world. So to a degree, it is a little bit analytical, but I also sort of try and weave in some sort of, I guess, more philosophical or even, I guess, an emotional blend to some content. Like there's a lot of content that I haven't quite managed to put up yet, that hopefully will sort of convey that to a greater extent. But something I'm very passionate about is not fitting the world into these sort of very, very simple categories. And I think one of the ways that we can have a better understanding of the world is seeing that some divide between, say, the way that someone makes a decision in an emotional kind of manner, or the way that someone makes a decision in an analytical kind of manner, are not as disparate as what we actually think. So yeah, I guess that's one of my goals with the site, is to sort of just show people that the boundaries that they think exist between things may not be as evident as what they think. So yeah, the reason I guess I created it was just because I'm very interested in a lot of things, and I'm very passionate about health and fitness. That's sort of, I guess what I do for a day job. Not that that's sort of a good way to describe it, but it I, someone made the point, or probably lots of people have made this point, and I'll wrap it up because I'm talking a lot now, but someone
No.
made the point that uh, when they discuss writing with people, people often say, "Oh, I don't, I couldn't free up the time to write." Like that seems there's such an opportunity cost to writing and a time commitment. And the response this person gave was basically like, you spend so much time reading and learning and developing your brain, like you're not actually justifying that resource expenditure unless you're actually creating and writing and doing things with it. Like there's such a cost to what you do already, you may as well capture some of that value by creating something with what you've learned. So I guess that's sort of somewhat what I'm trying to do with the blog. Is just, I think it's useful just, yeah, even for my own thoughts. It's a lot of information coming in, but when I can see them actually going out, my thoughts going out, I have a better ability to to actually analyze them and see how effective they are.
You mentioned this way of reacting maybe to things and developing thoughts, emotional and analytical. Have you found that maybe writing things down, having to like put on paper all the information that you observed, make you think about stuff in a more analytical way, rather than when you are maybe in a conversation, you might react emotionally, and you don't have that time to really think about the things you're discussing about.
Yeah, I would say that's extremely true from at least my own observations. I think when we have conversations with people, we tend to find ourselves in a position or positioned very early in the conversation one way or another, and we end up sort of trying to defend that position regardless of whether that's actually the true position that we hold. Like you engage with someone in a conversation and you get stuck on some point that you might only be, say, 55% for, and you're actually 45% against it. But for some reason, this person, either agrees or disagrees more strongly with that point than what you do. So you end up going to the other end of the spectrum, mm-hmm. and sort of it's this really kind of savage tug of war. And as you mentioned, I think there's just the emotional element of it, and those two things are probably very much tied together. So I've definitely found when writing my thoughts down, I not only have an ability to be more calm and analytical because writing is a very long process, but also when I write down, I guess, maybe emotionally fueled things, I actually recognize that I don't even believe them. And it's like, that's what the backspace button is for. Basically, it's just like, oh, I thought I believed that. And actually now it's on paper. That doesn't actually even seem to be true. So it's this really nice ability to hopefully put out a better brand of thoughts, but also clean up some thoughts that are actually, they've got some malware stored in there somewhere.
Maybe you are, while reading, you're really playing both sides of the equation of what you would have in a conversation. Well, where you have someone else who has maybe a different belief than you, and you're trying, as you said, and I think that comes down to a trait of critical thinkers that don't let their own belief get in the way of like finding what's true rather than proving themselves to be true, to be right. Which I think you can't do in a conversation with yourself while you're writing, because you then don't have the other guy on the other side that is trying to argue against you. So maybe that's part of the reason why it forces you to really be true, to be sincere with your thoughts, and maybe say, this is something that actually I thought I believed, but it doesn't pass the test of being true, so to speak. So
yeah, I think that's an excellent point.
You at some point you said that you also write because you want to better understand the world. Is that correct? And I know that you believe books are very, very useful for that. Would you maybe like to say something about why you think it's so important to read books that are not specifically like what we tend to consume on a daily basis about training, nutrition, and so on, and explore different areas?
Yeah, no, thank you. I do. That is in regards to your question about better understanding the world. Yes, I certainly do write and read to better understand the world. I guess the sort of first premise in that logical equation is that I believe at a very fundamental level, if I understand the world to a greater extent, I can operate and act within it to a greater extent, and that should minimize the future pain that I might go through. Life is going to produce a certain amount of pain already, so I think you're best served by minimizing how much of that you create for yourself by hopefully creating understanding and informed action. In regards to books, I think books are fantastic because when you read books, you recognize that there is this you get this very united and I think reassuring feeling when you read passages that were written, not only 10 years ago, but maybe 100 or 200 years ago by people who are basically experiencing very similar things to what you have experienced. I think one of the big paradoxes of the human condition is that we feel so alone, and it's such basically a common feeling. It's like everyone feels alone, everyone feels misunderstood. And when you read someone who puts things like that into words that you felt that you couldn't even put into words so well, it's a very, very reassuring feeling. So I think from just sort of a personal perspective, that's a really good idea. And that, I guess, applies to more sort of philosophy or you might even say sort of self-help books to a degree. But in regards to why I think books are one of the better methods for understanding the world or yourself even as a component of the world, I think because there does tend to be such an opportunity cost to creating a book, people tend to write books on important topics. Like, it's very easy to tweet nowadays or put up an Instagram caption. And I think the quality of the content, or the ease at which content is created, means the quality of the content does deteriorate to a degree. Not to say all books are great, or not to say that all tweets are bad, but I think there is something to be said for long-standing content. And the final thing I'll say is I think if you can find good books, you are very likely to be changed by them for the better, whether it be in your understanding or your action or just how you conceive of yourself or whatever you might consider an improvement to be. And I think that's because you basically need to be exposed to high quality content for a significant period of time for it to have a meaningful impact on you. By the time you finish a really good book, that book has primed you on that topic for, a few hours or a few days or a few weeks or a few months, depending on how long it takes you to read it. But it has been sort of this very immersive and massaging of those thoughts, I think, for a long time. Whereas I was thinking about this today, that effectively there's a lot of books that are written that are just expansions of like fortune cookie, sort of like 2-sentence long things. But it takes you to read something that's 300 pages for that really to sink in. And I think to a degree, the thing that frustrates people about books is that they're really long, but that's also what I think makes them really valuable.
Mm-hmm. And also I think, as you wrote in an article, is just people are, I try speed reading in the past, and I know it's a thing that, because most people say I don't have time to read books, which in reality I think they just don't allocate time to read them in their day. And you actually listed lots of useful tips for how to do that, and I relied on lots of them. Like, it was amazing because as I was reading them, I said, okay, cool, we are on the same page here. I do the same thing, and I think the same. Maybe the only thing that I do that you didn't mention is that I also listen to them. I found audiobooks there, like I use like at 1.5 speed or 2 speed, depending on how fast the speaker talks. And that allows me like to use the time where I'm at the groceries maybe, or I'm cleaning up my room, and use this time in something that, with a book that maybe is not as like I'm not listening to Steven Pinker while I clean up my room. And yeah, so you said that there are some books that just require more time to read. And you said sometime you find yourself like 5 minutes to read a single page and really sink that in. and then as you maybe warm up a little bit, then it goes faster. Do you think people are too caught up to, like, they already start with the idea that they don't have time, and so they want to get through a book too quickly, and they end up not really retaining much of what that book has to offer?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I will just quickly say that I love how we do have an ability to like interact through Instagram, and we do chat occasionally. So if there's ever things that I do post that, you know, you don't disagree with, or that you do think you do in your own life, like that's always really helpful. Like if you do comment back, and so do please feel free to do that, because I guess one of the things that I've definitely found when you write and you put things out into the ether, like I guess you have no idea how they're being received. And like I often get really nice messages, but I guess it's always nice to have some direct feedback on how people are receiving it. And because I also just don't want to think incorrect things. Like if I think something and someone disagrees, I want to know why they disagree, and then hopefully I can upgrade my opinion. But to your actual point, yes, I do think people are in general tend to be in a rush to complete lots of things. I think that is a little bit of the trap of modern day life. We have that sort of hyperconnectivity. It feels very go, go, go. And people have sort of been complaining about this general phenomenon for decades now. But I guess with the information age, as it sort of progresses, it seems to be speeding up. And to a degree, I think we learn to cope and deal with it and adapt. But my general observation would be that people are trying to optimize for short-term goals a little too much, and they might not consider that they are actually doing that, but I think they prioritize tasks that can be completed faster, because that way they can get more tasks done. And I think that kind of person ends up basically constructing a future where they need to do more tasks because they haven't done the right ones from earlier in the process. But I would be very keen to hear your thoughts on that if you have any observations.
Yeah, while you're talking about that, or thinking about something that is often brought up in productivity books, there is the fact that people tend to just open their email on autopilot, and they just go through the email, just switching the focus from what they should be doing to what gives them the idea of doing something. And that doesn't really require that it has such a low cost of action, because I don't know where I read this, but the difficult thing is not to get going. And there are certain tasks that just, the cost of doing it, of starting to doing it, is so high that you'd rather move on to something that is just, open an email, read it, and it gives me the idea of being productive, but I'm really not. And a good quote that I like is, don't tell me how much you work, tell me how much you get done. And I would add, or what you actually want to get done. Because I could do lots of things in a day, but if ultimately they're not the things that I planned to do and that are high priority to me, was really a day worth of work. I don't think. Would you agree?
I think that's a really good point. And I think to a degree, I think people probably do this because they don't have some kind of vision for the future for themselves, maybe. I'm not sure. Like, as I said, I didn't necessarily say this, but I've only lived one life. I can only have my own thoughts, and that's why I always wonder what other people are thinking. But I guess I have it's flexible, like it's not a rigid vision of the future for myself, but I have quite a strong idea of where I want things to go. And I think that's why I have some clarity over which tasks I should and shouldn't be doing. Whereas I think maybe if you lack some of that vision, then maybe it is easy to sort of fall into that trap of just doing the faster things and the easier things. But I think that's somewhat self-fulfilling in a way. And as you continue to do that on a daily basis, it feels like this more just sort of sinking trap, and it's just a hole, and you don't actually have sort of any structure or guiding things in your life. And then that's why you don't have a vision. But I'm not sure. I definitely need to think about more about that.
Yeah. So what are you reading at the moment?
I've got a few on the go. I am reading The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. I was sort of very late to the Nassim Taleb party, but I'm going to read his entire inserto. I finished Fooled by Randomness a little while ago. I am going through How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was a book that... So yeah. It was actually a book that had been recommended to me a number of times, but it wasn't until I read one of Paul Graham's essays, and he actually recommends it. And I was like, okay, fine. I respect him so much that I'll read it. It's not actually as bad as what I thought, to be honest. Like, I had probably very strong conceptions of it before I got into it, but it really is a pretty good exploration of human nature, I would say. I am reading, I think it's called Learning to Live or Living to Learn. It's a series of 11 essays by Eleanor Roosevelt, and that's I'm really enjoying that. That's basically her guide to sort of living a more meaningful life. So probably in that, a lot of them are, well, except for the Black Swan, sort of like probability, risk, randomness. That's all very much sort of my wheelhouse. So the other two were attempts to get a little more outside of that. But probably, I'm also reading Statistics Without Tears, just as a sort of refresher on statistics, because as we've discussed, like, I'm trying to learn a bit of computer programming, and I'm now going to try and apply some of the basics that I've learned in Python to sort of more data analysis and statistics, sort of give me a bit more direction. But hopefully by the end of this week, I'll have finished those books, and then I'm going to do more of a deep dive, hopefully, into sort of the decision-making, probability, mental models kind of interest that I really have. I've got about 6 books lined up that I really want to just immerse myself in, and write a series on probably epistemology and holding the most probable beliefs possible.
Mm-hmm. That sounds really cool. And I'll probably ask you about those books after we finish.
For sure.
And how is computer science going? Like, how are you finding yourself learning about programming and stuff? Because I also saw you also read a book about assembly. Is that like...
Yeah, I did.
That's painful. And I'm a computer scientist. That's painful. Yeah.
That was that book was a slog, honestly. That really slowed my reading for this year. I was averaging about a book a week. Like, I read multiple books at once, but sort of the turnover was about a book a week. And I flew through the first third of it because I loved the first third. It was sort of like all about Boolean logic and how you construct sort of really rudimentary systems from basically just the simplest electrical circuits through to sort of Morse code, and how they discussed Braille and a few things like that. But then once it got to probably 3/4 of the book was electrical engineering stuff, with, you've got like AND OR gates and then things like that, and it just I don't know. It was in this very, very stubborn phase where I was like, no, I'm so determined to learn this computer science thing. But I think I really banged my head up against the wall with that book. I don't think I was ready for it. And that was a stubbornness thing. But to sort of your actual question about how I'm going with learning computer science, I'm really enjoying it. It's been, well, for starters, it's been good because I actually pushed it away to such an extent, that kind of learning. I basically dropped sort of any IT or computer-based class as soon as I could in high school. I basically had one of my friends help me do my two, and when I say help me, basically did the entire thing for me, my two statistics subjects at uni. Like, for my master's, like, I loved all my sports science content, but two subjects I had to do programming in R, and I thought, man, I can barely even open a Word document at this stage. And so there's, there's a bit of a qualification on my master's there. It's like, ugh. But the thing that's been really, I think I'm obviously getting past that, and I'm really excited now to learn multiple languages. But I think the thing that's been really instructive for me is there's an extremely common sort of frame of thought that I've noticed in the programming community, that the way you learn is to just do, and then you make mistakes, and you've got to write code, you've got to read other people's code, not just like the code in the textbook. It's just this very practical way to learn. And then when you get stuck, that's when you go to Stack Overflow, and that's when you go to the textbook. And it seems very different to how we learn in other subjects. And yeah, I guess it's just making me reconsider how we teach things, whether it might be fitness or how to be sort of, a better personal trainer or anything really. It tends to be very theory first, and then once you've got enough theory, then we let you go out into the world to practice it. But I've found the opposite to be true with coding, and yeah, that's been interesting, I guess I would say. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know this is your area.
I think that in other areas is the time frame that requires to get a feedback on what you did wrong is completely different. Because if you write a code and you get an error, you know that there is an error, and you then need to just find it and fix it. Like, if I make a bad program for someone, it might take me, and if I think that's a good program, it might take me a few months to see, okay, we're not making progress, or at least a few weeks, we're not making progress. And then that also requires a certain degree of self, like, you shouldn't be too self-confident in the fact that you did the right thing. You need to be humble and say, okay, maybe I made a mistake. You don't need that level of humbleness with Python, because it's just going to still tells you, look, it doesn't work. Or if you're in C, it's even worse, because you're going to get like some memory error, and then good luck figuring out what pointers you got wrong. So yeah, I think it's a bit different. But yeah, that's an interesting point of view. Have you ever considered reading something about algorithms?
Yeah, well, yes, I definitely have, but I would just like to say that's a fantastic point. And this is why obviously like conversation and things like that are so useful. So can I just clarify and try and understand what you're saying? Do you think it's valuable that we learn the theory first for something like personal training? Well, for starters, there's a risk of hurting someone when you're personal training. So we need to consider that. Like, it's important to learn some degree of safety. But say you could, hypothetically speaking, imagine we had very good artificial general intelligence that had all the way down to, muscle biology or whatever. But say you could train someone not at the risk of hurting them. Would you suggest it's still important to learn the theory first because you actually need the theory to construct your appraisal framework, if that makes sense? Like, if you don't learn the theory first, even if you do good things and program really well from them, you won't be able to understand why you did the good things well. So is that sort of what you're saying? Like,
I mean, that's a good question. Honestly, I don't know, because over time I went back and forth on at some point in my sort of so to speak career as a personal trainer. I was a guy that says you gotta know the theory. You can't write a problem if you don't know the theory. Then I got to a point where I realized, okay, I could have known all the theory in the world, but I still don't know how to apply it to a certain individual, because theories usually speak about populations, or at least a category, and you are dealing with an individual, which is just one statistic. And the way he responds to certain things, or the way he likes certain things, it's just maybe it's a bit away from what the average of the population you study the theory on would suggest. And then I'm at the point right now where I say, look, I think the nice thing about theory is that really allows you to understand why things work. So you don't need to know the engine of a car to drive it well, but if you do, that allows you to better understand things, and it's ultimately what we've been told for the last 30 minutes. It's understanding the world and why, and the mechanism behind certain things. So I don't think one necessarily need to know like sliding filament theory or the physiology of muscle to make a good program. Though I think if you have a passion for writing programs, at some point you will gravitate towards physiology and biology, which is exactly what happened to me right now. Like I'm studying on the guided and whole, and I'm studying on the Albers for biology, not because I need to know those things, but it's just I want to know. I want to know how does hypertrophy work? Like, why do muscle put on more protein? Like, so not sure if I answered your question, but
no, you did. I think you made some excellent points, and I guess, yeah, I think you've got some really valuable insights to offer, and I learned a lot from you. But to go back to your question or your comment or whatever it was, but yes, I am definitely considering learning about algorithms, and I've got a tab open at the moment actually, which is just sort of a primer on algorithms, and then I'll probably move to I think there's an MIT book on algorithms that's very highly rated, but I think I probably need something I need the algorithms for dummies before that. But why do you ask specifically?
Because like my first impression of when I transitioned from computer science to the fitness world is that and this goes back to what you said at some point, where you said, what's the highest probability of a claim to be true? How can we determine that? And the main difference is that in computer science, it's based on math. So if you make a claim, you gotta back it up. Or at best, you could say, we believe this to be true, but we don't have the tools yet to say it's true. Like, for instance, something that I'm sure you would like if you look it up, it's the P versus NP question. That's mainly the question of why is it easy to verify that a solution works for a problem? It's much easier than finding the solution for a problem. That's in a very philosophical way, but it's a really super cool question in mathematics. You get a lot of money if you solve it. But by the way, yeah. So in the fitness, you can just make a claim, and you can say, yeah, I observed this on my clients. Okay. But then when you go to the root of that and you say, okay, but observation, again, it's the scientific method. So were you isolating variables? Were you making sure that you didn't have any confound? So that's why I asked, because I think the beauty of algorithms is that you can see a proof of what and of why it works, of correctness, which is amazing to me. And it's something that it's missing in the fitness community, because we make claim based on likelihood, of probabilities, and some time of belief that we haven't proven yet. We think this works this way, we don't know yet, so on. Not sure if you have the same feeling for what you read.
Yeah, no, I don't. I guess I've never heard of that equation that you spoke about, so I'll probably refrain from commenting too much, but that does sound really interesting and definitely right up my alley. So when I give you that list of books about what I'll be diving into next, then sorry if you can hear the dog barking in the background.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, when we do a swap of content, I'll need to get that equation off you, or the sort of the name of it. But I was going to ask, do you have any good resources or book recommendations that you think might be a good place for me to start with algorithms? Or is it one of those just it's so big and tough to understand that it's just, you got to jump in somewhere?
No, I don't think it's tough to understand. There are different types of arguments, like, there are sorting algorithms, there are searching algorithms, and then you have scheduling and so on, all type of things. So first of all, you will find something that you like more than other things. But yes, I do have resources. I think there is a course on Coursera. If you maybe want to watch it rather than read it, which is very well structured. It's by a professor, Tim Rogerden, who's a big name in the field of algorithms. And he actually made a new course, I think. He teaches at Stanford, if I remember correctly. That's a very good course, and it's structured as I said. There is, the sorting algorithm is one of the first things you look at, and then in computer science you have data structures. So you start learning about lists, arrays, matrices, trees, graphs, and then you say, okay, now that we have those structures, what cool things we can do with those structures, and then you're exposed to a whole new variety of algorithms. And yeah, it's really nice topic. I think one should be exposed, at least at a high level, to those things, because it really makes you think in a different way. Like the way I think when I write a program and so on, it's completely different. I think if I didn't take a CS degree.
Yeah, that's great you mentioned that, because I was actually about to ask a question on that. It's very common to hear, I guess, from the computer science community that they, due to computer science, they've learned to think in this really unique and special way. And what I've been trying to work out for myself is it a case that, well, I think to a degree, as we evolve, as we gather knowledge, everyone tends to think in sort of some kind of unique way, obviously. So that's not necessarily to say anything, but I guess the question I'm getting at is, do you think there is something like quite specific and special that you can gain from learning computer programming or sort of computer science, or learning about algorithms, that you can't gain elsewhere?
I think you could gain it elsewhere, but I don't think there is such an emphasis is in computer science. And I think it comes down to one word: optimization. So in computer science, in my master, I studied complexity theory, which is like a higher level, like it's something closer to mathematics, where you look at problems, right, than algorithms, and you say, okay, depending on how efficiently we can solve this problem in terms of space and time, then we can put it in a certain category. And all the problems in this category are equivalent in some way in terms of computational power we need to solve them. And so now you have this big structure of problems and these big classes of problems, and you have subclasses and so on. And that goes back to the thing that I mentioned about P versus MP. But the idea is that you start to think about, how can I make it better? How can I make it more efficient? Can I write the code in a better way, in a more understandable way? So you have this constant question in your mind about, could I have done it in a better way? Can it run faster? Can it use less memory? And I think that it's something that I find in the way I make programs for people. Like I say, especially when I look back, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but when I find myself to looking back at the mesocycle that I did, and I think while you write it, you have sort of a bias that now that's the best thing you could do at the moment. But when you look at it after a month, you say, why did I do this? Why did I put this exercise here? Why so many sets and so on? And I kind of approach it in a very optimization way. Okay, let's fix the thing that I don't like anymore about this program, which I did, and let's improve it in a sense. So
yeah, I think that's, again, you make some excellent points, and that is definitely something I've found that seems to be a prominent theme in the computer science world. Is it's not just output driven. It's very sort of, okay, now you've got the right output. How can we clean this up to be, as you said, to be much more efficient, or not even to produce a better result or a faster result, sorry, but how could we write this code so that someone else could come along and then understand it? There's this extremely, it's not just optimized from the output you're getting, it's how efficient you're getting to that output. And then could we just unplug you from that and then plug someone else in? And then how well could they interface with the code that you've written? So I think it's really interesting how it's very multi-dimensional like that. And I think that does support your point that there is just a strong optimization theme. But to your point about programming in the training sense, that's certainly true, and I've definitely experienced that myself as well, thinking that, I may have just finished recently, say, reading a new book on training programming, strength programming, and think, yep, I'm at the peak of my knowledge, I'm at the peak of understanding this topic, and I write, say, programs for the next, few weeks for my clients, and then when it's time to review them again, I have the exact same experience and think, what was I doing here? And the question that often leads me to is just, it makes me wonder how much of, or it tends to signal to me that there's something very, maybe not quite environmentally driven about it, but clearly it's not just, say, my knowledge that's the thing operating here. Maybe that program was constructed sort of based on 60 or 70% of my knowledge, which is the thing that the book was hopefully feeding into. But that remaining percent was just very much what exercises had I been reminded of lately, or what programming strategies or techniques. There was something, I guess, more transient about it. If I could come back still in a relatively short period of time and go, what's all this? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I want to make 2 points. The first is basically the thing I said about optimization. You see another example is mathematics, where you see a theorem and you see different proofs of the theorem. So the question is why people made different proof. Once you prove something, why do I have to prove it another time? And then you find different proofs that use different approaches. And maybe some proof is even shorter or just more elegant, as mathematicians say. And so they also approach it the same way. There is actually a proof on, if I remember correctly, on planar graphs, on planarity, where Yeah, I mean, there is basically this four-color theorem. If I get it wrong, my algorithm professor will kill me. But so there is because I haven't touched it in so much long. But it's cool. Like if you think of a map, basically there is this idea that you can color it with four colors, regardless of how the thing touch each other. And this gets down to planarity. So you can write this as point and connected by edges. And then there is a cool theorem that basically solve this problem. And there is always a four coloring, okay? That you don't have adjacent colors essentially, the same adjacent color. And this was like a 40-page long, if I recall. And then over time, people just go back to it and refine it. There's actually a part of which is algorithmic, and the rest is mathematics. But they basically refined it over time. So you see the same thing there. And the other thing is, I don't want to overwhelm you with stuff to read, but you've got to read something about machine learning because it's so cool. Because typically we talked about programming, and usually you write a function that takes basically a program is just a mapping of an input with an output. If I get this an input, I want that the program gives this an output, and so on and so forth. And so you tell the function what to do. In machine learning, you write a program that learns something about the world and then does something, which is beautiful, because it's not like you don't start with a map of input and output. You start just with a behavior, and he's going to observe something and react to it in a certain way. And the more it observes, the more it changes its behavior. So yeah, I think, machine learning is pretty cool. You got to read about that.
Yeah, please don't be worried about overwhelming with book recommendations. It's really nice to be on the receiving end of that for once, because that's a common complaint that my friends and sort of family have, is that I'm always giving them homework. Like they mention, oh, I'm sort of interested in this topic. And it might be just one of those sort of like off the cuff comments, but then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, here's this. And then the next week or so I'm sending them an article a day, and then I've got a book recommendation, and they're like, yeah, I lost interest 3 days ago.
Okay.
But just on the topic of machine learning, I'm not sure if it's exact, I'm sure there's some technicalities of this, but I watched the is it DeepMind, or are they the
Deep Learning?
Deep Learning. They did the Go program, or there's a documentary. AlphaGo. Yeah, the documentary on YouTube was fascinating about that. It was that such a complex game. But yeah, as you said, it's like they didn't even know the answers. They sort of just programmed in some way for it to find the answers, which is really cool.
Yeah, basically, we're going in a completely different direction, but who cares? So the thing is about chess, which is cool, is that if you think about it, for every move, there is an exponential number of moves that can be taken after that. So if we start mapping that, we get a tree, which is one of the data structures that I mentioned earlier. So we get a tree where if we move a pattern, then we can move a tower or the horse in so many different cells. And so you start getting, so for each of these moves, the opponent can react in a different way. So you get a gigantic number of possibilities. So if you write a normal program that wants to explore that, basically once you get to 2 levels, 3 levels, it starts to be computationally too taxing. It takes too much time. So basically you can't approach it. So there is a way for it, there is a way to solve those things, which is called branch and bound, where basically you say, this branch is unlikely to lead me to the right answer, so I'm going to cut it and make it a little bit more efficient. So I'm just going to explore certain pathway of this tree. But that's, again, is still exponentially run in exponential time. And whenever you hear exponential in computer science, it's bad. So you want to hear polynomial. And so instead, with machine learning, what they did is, they did it with chess, they did it with other games. But the thing is that you just keep the program running and play games and lose games. So it's just going to learn and learn and learn and learn. And at some point, it becomes so good that it doesn't lose us anymore. And he actually beat a champion. He beat Gasparov, I think. He beat like chess champions. Like it's amazing. So yeah, and it goes back to what I said, that you just make it observe things, and it's going to learn on the way faster than a human being, of course.
So I just have one sort of final question on this topic, just quickly. Is when you said complexity theory, is that at all related to chaos theory? Are they sort of at all connected?
No, I don't think.
Okay.
At least I've never been exposed to a connection between the two things. But I haven't read much about chaos theory, so I might completely be wrong about that. It's about randomness.
Yeah, my understanding, and I'm by no means an expert in it, my understanding is that it's about basically trying to understand extremely fickle systems, like say something like the weather. We're gaining a degree of predictability over that now. Like we don't understand it completely, but my general sort of understanding is that the weather applies to chaos theory because there might be such fine changes in variables that we can't actually even detect them. So what it presents is basically randomness. I guess chaos theory is probably the presumption that the randomness we are seeing is stemming from a deterministic basis and trying to understand that. So it sounded sort of similar to how complexity theory is maybe not solving the problems, but it's at least trying to categorize them. Is that, I'll let you speak on your thoughts now.
Okay. There might be some connection in the sense that among those classes, you have probabilistic classes. So you have classes where you have an algorithm and it either runs in probabilistic time. So whenever you say random algorithm, basically you can imagine that you have a coin and you're just flipping a coin multiple times. And depending on the outcome, head or tails, the algorithm does something. So you could either have an algorithm that runs in a probabilistic time. So basically, sometimes you're lucky and it runs very fast. Sometimes you're unlucky and it takes a lot of time. Or you have another class of algorithm where you're always gonna get get the answer in a specific amount of time, but with a certain probability it's going to be right, with a certain probability it's going to be wrong. So say 3/4 of the times it's right, 1/4 of the time is wrong, but it runs in a fixed amount of time. So you have these two kinds, and you can make all sorts of subclasses. You can say, okay, so the time maybe could be a factor of the size of the input and all those things. But let's not go into too much detail. But there is a cool thing that is called derandomization. Basically, the idea is that you take a random algorithm, you want to make it deterministic. Because essentially, if you have a function, you have a deterministic algorithm. So you have, it does always the same thing. A random algorithm doesn't always do the same thing. But there is a technique to derandomize. And the idea behind it is that a random algorithm so if you're running an algorithm, you can predict on which result of the coin flip you're going to get. Then if you can predict that, you can make it deterministic.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, because it's like, okay, now I have these, so I know that I'm going to get these long tails of heads. Let's behave like this algorithm when it takes heads. And that's deterministic. So you can't do that with all algorithms, of course, because if not, we wouldn't have probabilistic algorithms. But you can do it sometime. And there are cool examples of that.
Oh, that's amazing. I can't wait to understand this area to a greater extent. No, thank you for all your guidance that you've given me in this.
Okay, so maybe we can wrap it up on the general kind of thing, and maybe we can start talking a little bit about training. Actually, I actually meant it to be this way. Like, you're generally someone, like, I don't interview many people because podcast takes time and so on. But when I do, I want to talk with people that I really want to talk with. So,
thank you.
So yeah, okay. So now for training, it's just a few questions that I'm interested in knowing your opinion on how you approach things. So the first thing is, how often you tend to program deloads, and do you pre-plan them or they are reactive deloads?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that has changed. Well, I will say it's changed even in regards to now that we're under lockdown to a greater extent. So, like here in Melbourne, with the COVID-19 issues going on, I am basically operating off, maybe we'll say, subjective data to a greater extent. Like I'm being guided by the reports I'm hearing from clients to a greater extent, rather than being able to see them and interact with them in person to the degree that I was. So, and given that there is sort of just general anxiety and stress in the air, whether it be, sort of mental health from people being just locked up in their houses all the time, or maybe losing a job, uncertainty just about the future. So I think all those factors have meant that I am probably deloading more frequently now. And I'm just, I guess, applying that specifically to this situation. I'll give my more general answer afterwards. But yeah, I think now is a time, very much a case for risk management, for although optimization is important, as we've spoken about, like you need a degree of security in order to push for optimization. And now is not the time I'm trying to do that with most of my clients. So yeah, sort of having rough guides for pre-planned deloads, but if they're reporting feeling run down sort of anytime sooner. And as well, I'm just using rest days and lighter training sessions on a more frequent basis now as well. So I guess there's probably just been a general ramping up of stress management techniques. In regards to sort of just more whatever we might call non-random or just regular baseline style programming, I tend to have a rough range of when people deload. It fits probably in the 4 to 7 week mark. It's dependent on their sort of their calorie intake, whether they're male or female, whether they're large or small, how often they've been training, how their previous blocks have been, and how they've been responding to them. But I would say I generally have a range of, probably they might deload on the 4th or the 7th week. And if we have relatively flexible timelines, I'll just sort of see how they're going. However, if someone is peaking for not a bodybuilding competition, sorry, a powerlifting competition, I'll typically have slightly more rigid timelines. It'll be like, okay, you are either deloading on the 4th or the 5th week so that we can get this block in, and then we're going to start your peak and then taper. I still try to have a degree of auto regulation in there. I don't think we want to be entirely black or white, whether it's prescribed ahead of time or all auto-regulated. I think there is some balance. But my general model would be probably 3/4 of the decision in my mind is like, yep, it's going to be around this area. And then I let the sort of an interaction and feedback from the client guide it from there.
Mm-hmm. So about stress, you also look at things like, I think it's questionnaire based. Maybe you ask a few questions about how they're feeling, how they're sleeping, all these sort of things to assess whether they are too stressed and a deload is needed.
Yeah, that's I have probably maybe a slightly odd coaching style. I try to interact with a lot of my, I guess, clients, and I sort of feel bad even calling them that. But I try to interact with them in a very personal, friendly basis and just really try and understand understand their life and get a good understanding of them. And then that helps, that really aids my decision making, I feel. I guess the point that I sort of get that I'm getting at to there is, say I'm a client who wants programming advice. I go to my coach and I want him to tell me or her to tell me how they want me to train. And then I go to my friend and tell them all about how stressful my life is and, all these things. But like, that's actually information the coach tends to need to know. And so to a degree, I try and position myself in a way, and it's not sort of, I guess I don't do it in a careless way. Like I do genuinely care about these people. So then by sort of showing an interest in their life, I'm really trying to keep just general tabs on how they're feeling, how they're sleeping, but also how their relationships are going, how their work is going, whether they've seen their family recently, how they're dealing with lockdown. Like all of these things give me subtle data points that allow me to sort of extract a general perception of how they're dealing with, the stress in their life, because everyone's got stress. But yeah, I guess I don't feel confident in just the, hey, how are you feeling? Or what are your stress levels out of 10? I need to know how you're appraising your life in multiple domains before I have an idea of whether you're actually doing well or whether you're just telling me, no, I'm 3 out of 10 stressed because I want to do another week of training in order to deal with all the emotional baggage that I've got going on.
Yeah, I had lots of people telling me, I don't want to deload or I just want to push it because it's a stress relief. Training is a stress relief. And I said, yes, okay, but training is stressful by definition. If it's not stressful enough, you're not inducing an adaptation. So be careful with that thought. And I figured, yeah, I do a similar thing because I ask generally, okay, how was your week? Any wins, any losses throughout the week? And from there, I typically get answers like, yeah, I had a stressful week at the job because I changed position maybe, or I had an argument with my girlfriend. So I can figure, okay, this was a stressful week. If I ask them, how are you feeling? Are you feeling stressed? I might get a no, even though those things were in place. So I completely agree. I think sometimes clients have the information you want. They just aren't pointed in the direction of providing those information. So they have it. They just don't know you want it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's very much about how you ask the questions, because if you just say, how are you feeling, they'll typically give you that response of just how are they feeling in this very moment. And they might be feeling really good because they do their check-ins in the morning, after they've just woken up, and they love check-in day, they love their new program, and you're their coach who's potentially the first person that's paid them any attention for that week. Like there's all these things that might be skewing the data. So I think that's a really good point you make about trying to get an understanding of their week.
Do you think the attitude of and this leads to, I mean, is a reason why knowing the client, the person behind the client is important. Have you noticed that there are people just that have this attitude of, yeah, let's push it for another 5 weeks. They actually have one in the tank. and like, how do you manage like people that just want more volume, want more intensity, want more training sessions?
Yeah, so I guess that's always a tough one. Probably over time, people like that haven't stuck around to a degree. I guess what I'm saying is there is some kind of survivorship bias to the clients that you have, and most of the clients that I still have now, and most of them I've had relatively long term, have stuck around because they're willing to listen. Like that's the trick, or the trap when people won't listen. So probably of the people that want more volume, you end up being able to reason with them half the time, and then half of the time it's just they were going to do it their way anyway, and you need to be willing to accept that. But it usually just does come down to that very human to human interaction of, hey, like, you have, you are now paying for my services. I'm presuming it's because you trust my opinion on these matters. It is my thought that you don't seem to be keen on that. I want to understand why. And then, you try and compromise, and you've got to try and, I think, demonstrate and educate people on these topics. Like, I think something that's important for coaches to understand is when they have a client who is not seeing things from their perspective, they become frustrated and sort of go, oh, I'm the coach, they should be listening to me. This is, this is my job. This is what I do. But I guess the thing that I always try and keep in mind is that if you knew what that client knew, and I'm not saying because they know a lot, they might know too little, but it's just like, if you had the exact knowledge that they had, they would think that their perspective was correct too. So it's really important that you don't take it as a personal criticism when clients aren't listening to you. It's because of their reasoning framework, but because of what they think and believe about the training process, this is the evident conclusion to them. So you need to sort of speak to that matter of how they're arriving at that conclusion, not just going, hey, I don't care, you've got this conclusion. Let's do it my way.
Yeah, it depends on the context in which so what they have experienced, what they have read, what they have seen in the past. And of course, a coach has seen a lot more, and it has a bigger context to make a judgment. So yeah, completely agree on that. Do you use set progressions throughout the mesocycle? That's something I would be curious about.
Yeah, I do. I guess there's what we might consider the sort of the RP method for programming. I probably do use a decent proportion of that. I don't use set progressions each week, or each week across the totality of the week. Yes, there's definitely going to be sets going up, but it won't be the exact same exercise at the exact same point each week going up a set every single week. I try to sort of spread the totality of the set progressions across all body parts, sort of across all days. Say I might increase someone's total sets by 5 each week, and maybe it's sort of their biceps on Monday, then it's one of their chest exercises on the second day, something like that. I think you run into recovery issues and just time in the gym issues when you progress everything week to week. And I'm just a little more of a conservative nature, probably in general. I want people to be in the gym. But I would say with my own programming, I probably do slightly more on the side of actively driving sets up pretty consistently. So yeah, I guess I have slightly different approaches to myself as what I do to my clients, and that's not to say it's working exceptionally well for me, but I guess what I do with myself is probably a better indication of what I think to be theoretically optimal. But yeah, there's just always those concerns of how is this training program interacting with this person's life? Because as much as I like optimization and things like that, clients want fast results, but they also want them with about 17 minutes of gym time.
Yeah. Have you read the recent article on the mass by Eric Helms about set progressions?
I haven't read Eric's one recently. Unfortunately, I've been dedicating a lot more of my time to obviously reading about algorithms and things like that. I have
Yeah.
read I've read Mike's or the sort of the RP their proposal for it. I haven't read Eric's sort of rebuttal yet.
Because I in the past I was so I think it was the first the time where I started writing programs for people. It was just when the Principle of Strength Training came out, the book by Mike. And so I used lots of that, also about his templates. So I was looking at how his approach, and he had quite unique approach to things like his awareness plays a role in whether you want to increase sets or not. So I tried that. Now I don't use set progressions in the sense that they're not pre-planned. They're more like recovery based and based on inputs from the clients. And if we want to push things a little more, I push things a little more. I use more of a of course I put a lot of data analysis into my coaching, and I basically have an algorithm that tells me, okay, he's progressing in reps and weights, or he's only progressing in weights, and or maybe he increased the weights and lost reps on average, and this sort of things. And what I observed is that people just keep progressing. Like, the first time I read books about deloads, the first thing you come out, okay, progression starts to stall, then you take a deload. I haven't observed that, and I don't have an answer why yet. Like I have, like maybe it has to do to the fact that people just don't push hard enough at the beginning, so they're just starting, with the 3-4 IR, and then they get to failure maybe by the end of the meso, or they just get sloppy with execution. Maybe in the pursuit of increasing weights or reps, they just do 1-2 more reps with a different execution, and what I see is progression while on paper, but then it was not in real life. I don't know if you observe something similar, like that people can, like, I don't think basically I don't think that performance-based decision about deloads is the correct way to go about it, because I think people can just push, and maybe you change exercise when they stall on one, but they can just push like for an unlimited period of time. Have you observed something similar?
Yeah, no, honestly, I have. I agree and echo a lot of those points. I think, as I said, probably just in general, I do take a slightly more conservative approach considering clients. So that's why I do have those deloads planned in there. Often it's sort of, as well, it's a bit of an incentive for clients who aren't super interested in training. I can get them to sort of train more effectively across a 5-week span if I promise them that the 5th week will be easy, rather than if they just had 5 weeks of continuous training. I would definitely say that probably more in the recent, maybe not recent years, but just over time, my client list has become very much female and very much Gen Pop sort of in nature. Probably early on, it was very males focused on optimization, focused on body composition, that kind of thing. And I seem to be working with just a slightly different demographic at the moment, probably due to a number of reasons. But so I would say that obviously influences my training programming. I do think, though, that we overvalue deloads to an extent, and that depends on who you're talking to, though. Obviously everyone has a different opinion on them. But I do think, to maybe summarize my point, I think we can train and progress and adapt for much more longer periods of time than these very short. I don't think there's actually that much adaptation you can drive in 5 weeks, and sort of as a product of that, I don't think there's that much. You can create a lot of fatigue in 5 weeks as well, but I don't think there's sort of this, oh, really better have my deload now. It's week 6. Training is definitely a stress, but depending on how you're managing the rest of your life, I can't see reasons why you couldn't train for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, just taking sort of, the odd lighter day, maybe the additional day off here or there. But I can easily foresee 12-week blocks that are relatively productive the entire time and not starting at, 8 reps in reserve. Yeah, so I guess does that match up with some of your experience and observations a bit?
Yes, I tend to run deloads. So I have a maximum of time of 11 weeks, like on the 12th, it has to be a deload.
Yep.
Just not because scientifically it has to be, just because, okay, I mean, we pushed for 2.5 months. What's the benefit we're going to get on doing it for another month or so? None. Mm-hmm. What's the downside of taking a light week now? None. So let's do it. It's more like that. And then I have people deloading on average, most of people deload on the 8th week. So 7 week. The first is usually a lighter week. I say specifically, don't push anything to failure, but most people do anyway.
Yeah.
So don't push anything to failure. Just, especially new movements, be careful, see if they don't create any discomfort and so on. And then the what I've been doing recently, and also would like your insight on that. The week before the deload, I always decide a deload 2 weeks prior, but it's always within this time frame. So it's sort of a mix of pre-planned and reactive. So if on week 6, so at the end of week 6, I decide to deload on 8th, I increase the volume on week 7. I know the literature on functional overreaching isn't that convincing, at least not in the training spectrum of things. It's more about substrates, but at least to my understanding. But I also think, okay, we're not going to create any damage by increasing volume 1 week. Even if the volume is already high, you're just still going to take a lighter week afterwards. And it's just for 1 week. So I've started to do this, of course, with people that want, maximum results, not with the Gen Pop. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say on average, I do a similar thing. I don't probably place a tremendous amount of stock in the amount of additional training done during that week, and to a degree, like the amount of adaptation that would drive. And to a degree, it might actually be negating some of the beneficial effects of the deload. I do wonder about that. But the reason I do it is because what I value a lot is experimenting with clients. And if the person that I'm working with pulls up pretty much, say we're deloading week 11, and I've basically added a set to sort of every major body part or their primary movement sort of every day that week or whatever, like I've substantially increased their training volume, and they pull up not that much worse than the week they did previously, that might indicate to me that they were just in general capable of doing a greater amount of volume throughout the course of the training block. That sort of, when I'd tried to redline them, they didn't actually redline to the degree that I thought they were going to. So I guess the point I'm making is, yes, I do similar things, and there might be some benefit to it, but I think there is, and even if there isn't, I think there is benefit to experimenting with clients and seeing how they're pulling up. And what you can learn, because I think it's, again, something that I really encourage coaches to do, that, and you might share similar opinions or disagree, but I think if you follow sort of textbook theory and the optimal way to program from sort of a sports science perspective, then effectively an algorithm could do that for you, and you're not actually gaining the additional benefits and insights that you can by tweaking and adjusting things and treating them as sort of an n=1 science experiment.
Yes.
Do you agree, disagree, have any thoughts?
I completely agree. I mean, again, this goes back to what we discussed earlier about having the theory in place to then decide. I think it's useful to both understand why something you do on an individual can work and on someone else maybe doesn't, or at least not to the same extent. And also, I think it's useful to have the theory in mind, because it, at least for me, it raises questions, lots of them. Like sometimes I just think, okay, why does this go this way? Why does it work this way? And I wouldn't ask those questions if I didn't know maybe some physiology. And for instance, one example of this would be, I get lots of questions from people in Israel, because I don't know what the trend is in Australia, but in Italy the trend is you either do powerlifting for bodybuilding, so you do block periodization with peaking phase, strength phases, and so on, or you do RP style programming, and there are lots of people running around looking for them MRV, and I think that's not the way Mike thought this to be applied. And then you have people that maybe are sort of in the middle, so they don't go to any of those extremes, or maybe like they're a little bit more old style. So I get a lot of question about why would one increase sets, and why would one program for strength when it comes to bodybuilding. And those are two questions that make me think a lot about physiology. Like, for instance, and I want to know what you think about it. So the reason for increasing sets, to my understanding, is that so the literature, and this was one of the points of Eric in that article, the literature shows that if we run a mesocycle on different amount of volumes, the people that can recover from a little bit more volume get a little bit more hypertrophy, provided everything else is kept equal. It doesn't show that if we compare an average volume fixed throughout the mesocycle against an increasing volume with the same average, then the increasing volume throughout the mesocycle leads to more hypertrophy. Is that correct? So, which is why, I keep thinking about it. And okay, why would one want to increase the volume? Like, if we can start at a similar average, maybe after an intro week, and kept it constant throughout the meso. And this leads me to the physiology. Like, how does adaptation occur? Like, what are the necessary conditions for? And maybe you can touch a little bit on that, because I know that you do the physiology module for JPS. I don't want you to spoil too much about it, because that would take another hour, I think. But if you maybe want to go into a little bit of the physiology there, of what leads to hypertrophy.
Yeah, so the sort of the clearest indication of what we have that creates hypertrophy is mechanical tension, which is, as you spoke about, sort of sliding filament theory, when myosin, actin cross-bridge and pull on one another. So there are two types of tension. Predominantly there is active tension, which is when actin and myosin pull on one another, and there's force production. And there's passive tension, which sort of comes from the elongation of the muscle cells beyond their homeostatic limits, or sort of homeostatic range. I guess the theory that supports or that maybe the increasing set volume theory is propped up on is that, yes, we recognize that tension is important, but if we do more sets, we are accumulating more tension sort of area under the curve by doing that. And by not taking our sets as close to failure, we can sort of minimize risk while stacking up all this tension, accumulating tension over sets. To your point about, so does that sort of describe
Yes.
what you were getting at? Yep. To your point about we see people grow more muscle when they can simply do more training volume and recover from that training volume rather than the act of increasing their training volume up to a higher point. I think that is true based on my understanding, but I don't think that actually completely discredits the increasing set volume approach. And I haven't read Eric's article, as I said, so I might be completely butchering some things here. But one of the reasons that I do increase set volume in clients is in attempt to try and increase their work capacity and their sort of recoverability. So yes, maybe they will just grow. Maybe they're growing pretty well on 3 sets, and they're not actually going to grow anymore if I take them to 4 and then to 5 the week afterwards. But maybe when that next cycle, they can actually sort of do 3.25 sets and recover pretty well from that on a weekly basis. So maybe that frees up some adaptive resources when they're doing 3 sets. Maybe that allows sort of, just I guess an increase in that baseline of what they require. What they require, what they can tolerate. And I know there's a lot of discussion back and forth about this, and there's arguments made on both sides of the aisle, but probably just in my own general conception, what I generally believe to be true is that hypertrophy is, to simplify, it's a sort of strength, speed, power adaptation, as well as sort of an endurance aerobic style adaptation. I think, we can't just focus entirely on the tension or high intensity, lower volumes or things like that. We need potentially some more volume, maybe some more higher rep work. And it doesn't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive, but to support some of those blood flow adaptations, some of the capillarization and things like that. I think generally speaking, hypertrophy as an adaptation, errs on the anaerobic side of the spectrum. But I think we do need some of that, volume, sort of endurance, blood flow type thinking around it. I guess, maybe that's more my sort of just very conceptual understanding of these adaptations, and people might not understand what I'm getting at. But volume, I guess, in general is a variable that's aligned with endurance training. Like we talk about volume and intensity as if they're just these resistance training variables. But obviously a marathon runner does extremely high volumes. And I think, there is, consider almost higher volume training like marathon style or endurance training for your biceps. It's like when you're doing 10 sets of 10 or something like that. Like that is in effect like very much a marathon for your biceps. So I don't think that's maybe the optimal way to program. And it's just like, as we know, if you curl a pen 250,000 times a day, you're probably not going to grow very large biceps. So there needs to be some kind of intensity threshold met, but I think there's also some kind of volume threshold that clearly needs to be met, and we have these two intersecting lines. And I guess what I try and do is obviously work out where they're intersecting, but also how much I can push them by changing volume variables or intensity variables and things like that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes. Do you think increasing work capacity? My idea is that we increase work capacity so that we can do more volume in the next block, right? So because we now tolerate a little bit more. So if we keep this thing going, don't you think at some point we build so much work capacity, we either reach a wall or we make so much work capacity that we need to do more work, and we don't necessarily, so we have to, but we don't necessarily need it in the first place. Or it's like, because maybe one could do, okay, we have in mind a certain volume we want to tolerate well and progress at. We build work capacity towards that volume, and then we keep it constant for the next few blocks. Do you think what are your thoughts on these two different approaches?
Yeah, I think I'm unsure when it comes to the question of, so I guess I might rephrase this slightly. Like, there's the idea of doing the minimum effective volume because you don't want to raise, you don't want to raise the amount of work you've got to do even to just see gains. So you want to keep that as sort of as low as possible. And the question then becomes, does raising your work capacity or just your ability to tolerate resistance training increase that? And my suspicion is probably, I will say no. I think whatever price you must pay, say you do 2 work capacity training blocks, whatever price you pay due to an increase in baseline requirements, I think will have been paid off in addition to the benefits you'd acquired from doing that. I guess I think you'd have made a decent amount of adaptations, and it's not like you have grown minimal amounts of muscle and just raised your baseline. I think you'd have, say, grown pretty substantial amounts of muscle and potentially raised your baseline. And what you're just seeing is, now that you've got a bigger muscle, you have a slightly higher baseline. So I don't think it's necessarily, does that make sense? Like you've just risen the baseline without capturing the benefits. And I think in addition, say you've done quite substantial amounts of I think if you do sort of high volume work capacity style work, you will be more responsive to growing muscle with lower volume training, actually. So I think there is some credit, some merit, I will say, to Mike's approach that when you do a low volume phase, because that makes you more responsive to higher volume phases. But I think sort of the reverse is actually true, that as you do higher volume phases, you actually become, and they tend to be lower intensity, you actually become resensitized to a degree to higher intensity style training. So I don't think what you're trying to do is actually work up volume, then do a low volume phase that you try and maintain muscle and resensitize to the volume. I think what you're actually doing is, as you increase volume, you're increasing those sort of more, what we'll just consider endurance aerobic style adaptations. And that, like, in order to really capture the benefit of the hypertrophy, you then need to target some more of those higher intensity, sort of faster twitch. And again, I'm not saying those things specifically, but just that general area of concept. So I think you can basically be limited, and I'm probably not making really any novel points here at this case, but at this point, but I think you can be limited in your hypertrophy by doing too little volume or too little intensity. And what you really need to work out at any single point in time is like, what is the bottleneck that is confronting you most immediately? Like, do you need to potentially pull your volume back and push those sets a little closer to failure, lifting slightly heavier weights or something like that? Or have you been cranking heavy weights for a significant period of time and you need to do some slightly lighter, higher volume work? So I think rather than that sort of that jagged, I'll do it, maybe it's this way, up, down, then like up and down, I think the more sort of just like waving approach is probably slightly more optimal, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's something that I might experiment with in the future, like fluctuating over time, the higher volumes, maybe lower intensity. The only caveat I think there is it's difficult for, again, this is attitude based, I think, for people that maybe train high intensity to tell them, look, we're going into a block where I want you to keep a certain amount of reps in reserve across all sets, as well as it's difficult for someone who trains that way to switch on and say, okay, now I do 2 sets, but those have to be all the way to failure. The only difficulty is, I think, practically speaking, and I see that with myself because I did the mic style training and now I train with lower volumes. I wouldn't say low volume. People think I train low volume, but to me is what I can recover from. And I tend to use maybe a little lower frequency than before. Like my week is spread across 8-9 days. It's sort of a push-pull X rather than on 7. And the way I'm doing that is also because I'm enjoying training a lot more. Like if I had to do 4 or 5 sets of, RDLs with 2-3 reps in reserve, I would not be enjoying training that much as I'm doing right now. Though I would have to be analytical and say, okay, if this leads me to better gains, I should be doing it regardless, which is what a bodybuilder, so to speak, tends to do. It's just it doesn't care about what I like. I do what I have to do to get to where I want to get. So do you think that could be something that holds people back, being too caught up into a certain idea of training because it aligns with what they like rather than with where they want to be?
Yeah, well, I think just generally speaking, lots of the ideas we have, beliefs or things that we're attached to hold us back. But maybe sometimes we also need to consider that they hold us forward. Like sometimes the addiction that we have to, maybe suboptimal training programs is an addiction that at least means we keep coming back to training anyway. So yeah, I guess, yes, I think people get too attached to certain training styles and they would benefit from doing other things. And I think we see this a lot in the people that are used to doing the high intensity training, like they, dog crap training or whatever we want to sort of, they tend to be, annihilating, not stimulating, doing sort of probably subpar volumes, probably almost maxing out the risk they can do per volume they're doing, and really shooting their recovery in the foot, depending on exactly how you go about it. But for some people that really works. So it's like I can't necessarily say blanket statements, but I think the people that probably tend to be attached to I don't know how well I've trained unless there is just like sweat pouring off me and I'm cramping everywhere in my body. Those kind of people tend to be addicted to sort of relatively poor training paradigms, I would say. That, and they're difficult to pull back from that. I'm not sure I answered your question exactly, but
yeah, I think you did. I have one last one, if we have the time.
Go for it.
So when it comes to, you mentioned high reps and training, which is something that I implement constantly. I don't think I've written a problem where there isn't like 12 plus rep sets. But not sure if you're familiar with, I'm sure you are, but with the effective reps model of Beardsley, and Krieger also proposed something similar. So basically the thing is, we know that high rep sets, of course, create fatigue in a more metabolic way, whereas lower rep sets more neurologically. Of course, they're very high demanding in that regard. So if I do like a 20, 30 rep sets, like 15 of 20 of those reps are probably not that stimulating in terms of hypertrophy because I'm so away from failure. And also I tend to see people that when they do these sets, they go very, very fast at the beginning because of course the weight is light compared to their capacity of moving it. And so we don't even have the fatigue element that slows things down forcefully to create more tension, which I think is part of the mechanism why bringing them to failure works on higher sets. So do you think on those specific sets is valuable to maybe use things like a rest pose, which is in part the idea behind the MyoReps, I believe, where we just, once we get there, I'm not going to spend another 20 reps creating fatigue, but not creating as much hypertrophy stimulus, rather than when I do like 8 to 10. Yeah, as soon as I start the set, they're probably already quite stimulating reps. Do you think there's value in that?
Yeah, I think I think there's obviously trade-offs to doing multiple different things. There's trade-offs to everything. I think for the most part, yes, rather than going through the first, say, taking a really long break and then going through the first 20 reps again of a 30 rep set or whatever, I think you're better off doing rest, pause, and MyoRep style training. That might come with a slightly greater extent of central fatigue, possibly. But maybe that central fatigue build up, and I'm not talking about necessarily like central nervous system fatigue, but just like central as in like heart and lungs and those kind of central factors. But potentially the central fatigue that you create in that regard is actually equivalent to what you would have created doing the 20 reps anyway. So I guess I probably have more questions than answers here than anything. What I will say is, if I'm going to do higher reps, larger style sets like that, I do rest, pause, MyoReps style training. And I won't get people to do multiple high rep sets. They'll basically do that one activation set or whatever you want to call it, and then try and stick in a more effective rep range. But probably even then to consider is that I don't program that too much. I do think it is a good style of training, particularly for those that are somewhat sort of psychologically addicted to that very fatiguing style training, or maybe not even psychologically addicted. They are just ambitious, willing to sort of put in the work people, and they tend to get good results. So I shouldn't discredit them for that. But probably in general, I don't program too many sets above 15-ish reps unless they are sort of a specific set of that. It's probably, I guess, more infrequent in my training programming unless someone has specifically indicated, and I'm probably talking more like psychological factors here, that they enjoy that style of training or they really need to feel they've worked hard, and then it might appear in their training actually quite frequently. But probably if I was left to my own devices, there wouldn't be too many sets above, say, 15 reps. And of the ones that were, they would be the rest pause style training.
Yeah, similar for me. I think I program a lot of 12 to 15 rep sets, especially on isolation, 10 to 15. Getting up to 20 is already something that I do very infrequently. More than 20, I probably only programmed for people that had an injury. Maybe we're using BFR, I don't know, the 13, 15 protocol of BFR and so on. So yeah, I don't do that either too much. So yeah, I think that was a very, very cool and in-depth conversation we had. I know people maybe wanted us to talk a little bit more about training, but I definitely enjoyed more the first part. I don't know if that's the same for you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the chat. So that we ended up having what was supposedly a podcast, which was basically you tutoring me on computer science. So it was fantastic for me. So thank you. And I must say though as well, like there's tons of training, obviously information out there, and I appreciate that people look to me as a source for that. But it's also just really nice as well to have some sort of unique questions, and I think over time, as you've said, that as you've learned about computer programming or just computer science, or these concepts, that has aided you in your fitness information and decision making. So even if people are entirely interested in the fitness aspect, probably they do want to be somewhat willing to listen to the other things because it will allow them to advance in the thing that they actually care most about. And yeah, I guess that goes back to sort of my thing on books. It's like you've got to read far and wide and collect all that wisdom that's out there, and that will help you in the specific domain that you want to apply it.
Yeah, and I think especially talking with people who have a different approach, different belief, challenges your own belief, and you avoid the confirmation bias that makes you just talk with the people that are going to say, yes, I do the same as you do. And you keep confirming what you do, and you'd end up in a spiral where you just never change your mind on anything, I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Okay, for people who want to get in touch with you or maybe work with you, where they can find you.
Yeah, so probably if you want to work with me, then just the best place to go is the JPS Health and Fitness website. You can put in some kind of request there. My name might not appear. Sometimes I'm sort of hidden from selection just to manage my client load, which is obviously appreciated. But I guess special considerations can be made if people sort of specifically want to work with me. Then I can tend to fit people in. So yeah, you might just need to send an email or get in contact with me specifically about that if you can't find me. But yeah, if you sort of just want to chat nonsense, whatever, I don't know, you've got interesting questions, you want to talk books, you want to talk to me about something funny you saw on YouTube, or teach me something about computer science, then probably Instagram is a good place to find me. I can be slow replying. I do try to maximize my productivity by sort of somewhat minimizing my time on Instagram, but it's obviously a really cool service as well that allows us, it allows us to speak, and we're on different sides of the world. And as I said, I've learned a lot from you, and you've pointed me in a lot of cool directions. So that's appreciated. So it's not all unproductive time on Instagram, but if people want to find me there, it's just l.j.purcell, Purcell. My profile picture is Rick from Rick and Morty, so you probably should be able to locate me relatively easily. And yeah, I think that's about where I exist on the internet other than thereforethink.org.
Yeah, it's funny. We do the same thing on Instagram as well. I just installed an app to block me from accessing after a certain amount of time of using it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that like social media just ruin everybody's productivity. Just start a conversation and say, okay, it's gonna be 2 minutes, and after 30 minutes, you find yourself still talking. It's unreal.
It's I do really that is one of my strong opinions, and I think it's good that we put those checks and balances in for ourselves. Like, as you said, you've installed an app. I've removed the app from my phone and try and just access it through my computer. But yeah, I really like sort of Cal Newport's insights in this area. Being a computer scientist himself, I tend to be a little bit inclined to believe what he has to say on these matters. You can agree or disagree with some of his opinions, but I do think he is mostly on the money when it comes to we would live more productive and more meaningful, happier lives if we spent probably a little bit less time on them. But, as I said, I'm appreciative of getting to speak to you, Marco, and getting to know you. So we do have Instagram to thank for that, but it would be very nice to hang out in person in the future sometime.
Yeah, actually, I planned on. At some point I thought about coming to the JPS conference last year. The unfortunate thing is that you can imagine Rome, Melbourne, or Sydney is not that cheap.
Nope.
so I just went to, okay, let's see how much is expensive. Okay, how much can it be? Okay, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so expensive. Wow. Okay, at some point maybe I'll be able to do that, and we can meet in real life. That would be really cool.
It would be cool. If you make it over this way, then yeah, you're obviously welcome to come and hit us up. But if I make it over that way, then I'll be knocking on your door. Don't worry about that.
Oh, for sure. And you've got to see Rome. Like, you probably know that, but Rome is pretty beautiful.
It's on the bucket list. Don't worry.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the chat. It was amazing speaking to you. And I guess we'll talk on Instagram later.
No, that sounds great. Thank you so much for having me, Marco.
Okay. Bye.